Hi, Jeff Merrill in Baltimore, Maryland, with my good friend, Bill Parlatore. Bill Parlatore is a familiar face to anybody who knows anything about trawlers because he and his wife, Laurene, who couldn't make it today, started PassageMaker magazine. Bill, when did we first meet? Probably 98? When did the magazine start?
We thought about it in 95.
That's when you started the concept.
Then we did a business plan. Actually, Laurene did a business plan for 3 months, and we launched at the Annapolis show in January of 96.
Was it the powerboat or the sailboat show? Or both?
The powerboat show, and what was really funny is the U.S. representative for Grand Banks came over and said, "You really think there's enough of an audience for a trawler magazine?" But it was almost instantly popular because it's not like we created the trawler experience. It's just, it had existed out there.
You brought attention to it. You organized it.
It existed in this big thing of cruising, and we just drew a line around it. We just drew a boundary and looked at, it's a husband and wife usually.
Retired or on in their life.
Or just taking a break or whatever, but they want to just go explore the world, but they don't want to do it without being comfortable and have adventure, but safe and comfortable. And it just kind of was, well, gee, that's a lot of people.
Yeah.
And that's really why it just started to pick up. And after the first issue came out, I think we had 17 advertisers. Grand Banks said, "We're on the back cover till you're dead." I mean, till this is long.
They wanted it. They locked it in. Yeah.
So obvious. Yeah. And it was really wonderful because we got to work the booth, and people would just come up and want to tell you their story. And everybody has stories.
You didn't really have a big writing background, though, did you? Because you wrote these fabulous, long articles with great detail and discussions. What was your background for
That's
writing?
A fluke.
That was a fluke? Okay.
I didn't realize that was a skill I had. My previous careers was a computer programmer and then an analyst who would take technical information and translate it for the layperson.
Yeah.
And then that turned into me having a consulting firm, and I used to write a lot of resumes, but it still wasn't really...
It wasn't writing about something you were passionate about, like talking to people who were buying trawlers or who had trawlers or going to the yards. I mean, you look back at some of those old issues and you did a lot of traveling. You went to a lot of different facilities.
I've been pretty much everywhere.
Yeah.
But what was really interesting, since that wasn't my background, I didn't feel limited. And we used to have this conversation, the story determines its own length. Instead of saying, well, I'm just going to write, I have a hole here for 250 words. Then no, that's not what we're going to do here.
It's kind of how these interviews go. We don't have a script. We're just kind of talking as two friends, and we don't know what's going to happen next.
And so I think my favorite, longest story was doing Bruce Kessler's Spirit of Zopilote back in, I think, summer of 96. And it was 28 pages long.
Which no real magazine would ever do anything like that, right?
That's unheard of. Bill Pike said, that's just crazy, but it was really good. It was a lot because you give them information,
people are sponges for that. And there was this is before the internet too. So they didn't have online availability to look these things up. You had to look at probably a power motor yacht and motorboat and sailing.
Who tend to just write, small stories about boats without really going into too much.
Yeah, a couple pages details and then call or visit the manufacturer, see them at a boat show.
Where I would go to the manufacturer and spend a couple of days and go through it and meet the great guy at Grand Banks. All he does is build teak grates.
Yeah.
Just fascinating to watch. He's got sawdust everywhere, and he's building grates for all the different models for their various... The master great man.
Great master. And you were talking about the great man who does the grates at Grand Banks. What other yards did you visit? You were in Europe, you were in Asia. Where'd you go?
I've been pretty much to all the big yards. And it's really interesting to go to a boat yard because you can't believe what comes out of it came from where that started. I mean,
the finished product is unbelievable, but the facilities aren't.
It's not, there's no robotics. There's no spotless.
It's hand craftsmanship.
It's hand craftsmanship or guys working on a line that are just doing a lot of things, but it's not a process like going to see an engine being put together. We went to John Deere.
That's more
in Waterloo. And it's just the fact the people that give the tours are all retired John Deere employees.
Oh, so they've got that wealth of knowledge.
And so he would pull up to this machine. He said, that used to be my job. And that machine does such a better job than I ever could have done.
Wow.
because the tolerances are in microns.
Yeah.
And so you're seeing all this incredible stuff that at the end, then it's, well, if it's going to go in an ag engine, it gets painted this color. If it's marine, it goes that color.
Yeah.
And just how they kind of put them together, not like boat building.
Thank Charlie and Missy Hodge for letting us be aboard their Nordhavn 50 Ophelia to be able to sit down and talk where we can be uninterrupted and sit down and talk about it. I had 14 years at Nordhavn, as you know, and Nordhavn started building boats in Taiwan and then branched out and had another yard in China. And I was blown away with my original, but when I first met you, I was at Pacific Seacraft doing cruising sailboats, and we came out with the Bruce King Design 38T and talked to you about advertising in there. And going over to Asia and seeing how these guys build the boats, what cracked me, there was a lot of things that cracked me up, but one was the lunch break. They get the cardboard out, lay down, and guys were sleeping. They turn off all the electricity. All the boats were quiet, and the guys had their lunch break. They'd eat their lunch in 5 minutes, and they had about 55 minutes just to relax. They'd all nap, and they just lay cardboard down on the concrete. I would go during the lunch break to see the boats a lot of times with my camera because I didn't have to worry about the workers and all the saws and everything. And I'd get in a room with the lights turned off, and I'd use my flash camera, and there'd be guys sleeping on all the bunks. I didn't even know they were there. So it's really fun going to the boat yards.
Yeah, and of course, some yards have very strong cultural issues that you have to be concerned about. I was told, now don't take pictures of certain parts of the building because there'd be little altars set up with the incense and I guess Buddhist or whatever to kind of bless the work that's being done, but you can't photograph it.
Interesting, yeah.
And so that's, you had to be very aware of that. Although in going to Celine in China, it wasn't so much that as keeping the people away from you, because here's a Westerner with a camera. I want to see what he's doing.
Yeah.
And so a jet turn where they did build the Celine actually had guards protecting, surrounding me when I was trying to shoot a boat cover from a bridge. And there were like 100 people.
Oh, these are just the locals who are coming by.
What's going on? Is Tom Hanks here? Or I don't know,
Whoever,
Tom Cruise, whatever. And just so it's interesting to work in the culture that the yards are so different. You go to Holland, you go to Linsen, everything is spotless. The humidity is controlled. There's no dust anywhere. I mean, it's craftsmanship taken to the nth degree. It's really, really interesting. But wherever the boats are put together, you still can't believe that the quality that they put into it is not just, it's not what you see when you walk around a boatyard.
Well, and having sold a lot of boats and been at the yard, you have a ship date, they book a ship, and you're looking there a week before the boat's supposed to ship, and you think, there's no way that this thing's ever going to be done. But magically, it always happens. And it's just a phenomenal process. What are the questions that people asked you as you started the magazine? I mean, obviously you had to get advertisers, you needed to get the thing going. What were the common questions then, and have they changed now with people who wanted to get a trawler and get involved in this lifestyle?
No, they haven't really changed all that much. I noticed I've done a blog for the last couple of years, and I'm writing about the same things I wrote about back in the late 90s.
And that's followingseas.media.
Yes, which I stopped for a while because I got a new knee and I finished a book.
Port knee.
Port knee, new port knee.
All right.
But I wanted to get back to a comment you said about the delivery schedule. On the flip side of that, the company and the new owners would say, okay, let's schedule PassageMaker. Let's get Bill to come down and get on this boat and we'll go on a trip.
Yeah.
And they'd think it's just like put your clothes on and go. And they don't realize the commissioning process, the sea trialing takes way longer than they think.
Well, and that's a pretty interesting segue into the time we had together, because I was the project manager for the Nordhavn 35, and I contacted Bill, and Bill said, we'd love to do a cover story, which is a big deal. And I said, I don't want to do it on hull number 1 because I know we're going to make some improvements. So I think it was hull 6, and we went down to Texas.
Wasn't it 11 or 12?
Well, I'm pretty sure it was 6, but anyway, it was not one of the first boats. And we met down in Houston or Kima or somewhere, and
we did the coastal.
Spent 4 or 5 days together, just the two of us. It was
and I just remember how slow it was passing the ships because of the ship squat.
Well, the ground effect, yeah. When you can't run a fast boat in shallow water and get the speed you would expect, the bottom effect really brought it down. And those were a little bit heavier. They improved the design, but it was fun spending a couple of days with you and going and doing what the cruising couples are doing out there.
Running the generator with the air conditioning, because the big flies, if you remember, were covering the outside of the boat. It's like, I hope you showered today because we're going to be here. We're not going outside at all.
No.
And then we stopped at Rockport, was it?
I think it was Rockport.
And Rockport Yacht Club was having a dinner and they invited us over.
Well, and he was everywhere we would go by then, because the magazine was probably 2001. I mean, we could look it up, and Don will put the cover in the video, but you'd already had some established publications, and every issue you had from the editor, or
from the Pilot House.
From the Pilot House, yeah. And you were very recognizable. It was kind of fun.
But it wasn't so much me. What I tried to do is get real people's stories and get real people to write the stories. And they would always say, when you're getting back to your question, what would they ask me? I'm not a writer. I couldn't possibly do that. And I'd say, why don't you just take a stab at it and I'll ghostwrite it in the background and keep your voice and we'll work together.
Clean it up a little bit, but just come up with
because your story is way more fun than taking a professional writer and say, okay, write about something. Because their experience, you just can't invent stuff like that. And so how they deal with problems, how they deal with some of the problems on the boat, or some of the people problems, or just the fun that they had. It's just stories by the people were so much more compelling.
Which has really evolved into blogs now. I mean, people now can take videos and shoot photos and talk about their adventures. There's so many blogs that are available now. That didn't exist. That's all.
And so I'd be at a boat show, and one of those writers would come up and say, you'll never believe it. That article I wrote about my boat, when I pulled up to the fuel dock on the ICW, there was somebody holding it up. I swear this is true. Well, this is you. Would you sign my magazine? So they got their 15 minutes of fame, and then they wanted to write more because all of a sudden they broke through that inertia. I can do it, and I can work with Bill and his staff, and this is really great. And what I'm experiencing is what all these other people want to experience, but they don't want to necessarily. People that are new to it or just getting into it tend to overcomplicate it. There are hundreds of stories I can say, but the one that I remember was one of the trawler port seminars about picking the right boat. And it was this older couple came up to me afterwards, and I might have told you this, and his wife said, "Oh, they just wanted to meet me," and then she went to the ladies' room, and he said, I just know I'm never going to be able to get into this. I said, why is that? He said, because I have to have a Nordhavn 46, and I just can't afford it. And I said, well, where are you planning to go?
Right, yeah.
And he said, oh, we want to do the Great Circle, the Great Loop.
Big Loop, yeah.
And I said, what do you need a Nordhavn for to do that?
Yeah.
You could do that in a Boston Whaler. And so he started talking about his expectations versus what's the real dream that they're going to do. Right. Yeah, they might go to the Bahamas eventually, but you don't need a Nordhavn 46 to do the Erie Canal. And as I'm talking to him, he started getting taller. It was like a weight was off. He was like, really?
I can buy a trawler and it doesn't have to be a Nordhavn.
So we can just go out in the boat show. So when his wife came back, they went out and looked at trawlers. I don't know what the end of the story was.
We don't know what the happy ending
was. But if it was a main ship pilot or it was any number of Monk 36, so many other boats that you don't need to have all that stuff. And in fact, if the boats get too big or too air draft or too deep or too much tankage, it's a waste of money.
Yeah. You have to have the right tool for the job. Something I face a lot as a broker is people have a preconceived notion, and the advertising by Nordhavn and a lot of the big brands.
They're responsible for setting that expectation.
Yeah. And nothing wrong with Nordhavn, great boat, but it's more boat than what a lot of people need for what their mission is.
And if you remember that steel boat that was out for a time that was capable of rolling over and coming back and had like inch-thick windows. Like, come on, nobody's going to want to do that.
Yeah, the scare tactics there didn't really. I mean, it was their angle, and they built They built a lot of boats, and a lot of them are still out there, and they haven't proven that they can sustain a roll because who wants to go out there and prove that?
Yeah, we call it pleasure boating for a reason.
Yeah. Now you and Laurene have had a Zimmerman 36, right? Is that what did you have?
We built a Zimmerman 36 down in Matthews, Virginia.
Zimmerman, we'll see you at the TrawlerFest. Yeah.
Yes, he was a big help because he did exactly what we knew he was going to do. We had It
was local for you too.
No, it wasn't that at all. We had a boat built up in Maine by this Maine boat builder with the accent and everything through a broker from Seattle who we met, Mad Dog Marine. And anyway, this boat was so rough. It was never really finished. It had a John Deere engine because we had a great relationship with them. It was a 28-foot lobster boat, and I hated it. In fact, I remember sitting on it and starting to cry that this is so not what I wanted, because it wasn't finished. It smelled like styrene. It hadn't really been. It was a commercial fishing boat that was finished.
Well, and there's so many cool and good lobster boats. You just happen to end up with them.
So we wound up taking it to have Steve take a look at it and tell us what you think. So, of course, we went down to his yard and he said, well, you could spend a lot of money and it still wouldn't be a nice boat.
Yeah.
Let me show you a Zimmerman 36.
Yeah.
And of course, we fell for that completely because it's a gorgeous boat.
It is.
It was a gorgeous boat, and we had a lot of fun with it. And much like many of the seminars, even for people that are going to hear over at TrawlerFest now, we did exactly what we told people don't do. In 2003, we did an event called the Pokey Run, which is
I remember that. Yeah,
which is a poker run. It's a takeoff on fast boats, zooming somewhere and having party, and we're being slow pokes. So we did 39 boats, left Fort West Palm to go to the Bahamas, and there were 39 boats, 70-some people who had never crossed the Gulf Stream before.
Okay,
and so we kind of brought. It was really well organized. We had two groups, the fast group and the slow group, and it was the first time we'd really run our boat. So the first time I blew up the dinghy was in West End.
Wow. This is on the new Zimmerman.
On this new Zimmerman, and I blew up our Avon, and I put the fuel.
I think inflating might be a better word than blowing them up when we're talking. Anyway,
true.
Yeah.
But Tom Neal came over and was like, Bill, the fuel lines go on the wrong direction. Just all the dumb sophomore mistakes because you're supposed to get this stuff sorted out before you actually go. But it turned out to be a fabulous event. Nobody was killed. We had great weather. And at the end of it, they were all veterans enough that they all came back to the United States, kind of in groups of 2 or 3, but they all knew how to speak up.
Well, that camaraderie is so much part of the culture of being in the trawlers. I mean, it doesn't matter what brand you have.
Several years later, a number of them went back together.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing that this whole trawler experience is all about. It's the boats, the people, and the lifestyles, what I used to always say. And it's the people and the lifestyle. The boat is so inconsequential if it serves the purpose you need. I mean,
and you can be at any budget, any size. Mm-hmm. You just need to find what works for you. And a lot of times you're not going to know until you start doing it. And that's where your boat broker can come in and help you sell that one and get another one. But
if you don't start with the perfect boat, because you don't really know what the perfect boat, you just go and realize, this is hard to get on with a dog, as we were talking before, or scuba gear, or, you come back in a dinghy.
How do you offload the groceries? And
how do you get on the boat? Yeah. Do you look at these like classic double-ended sailboats? How do you get on from a dinghy? It's more difficult than it is today with the designs.
I think it was interesting seeing the evolution from the late 90s to now, 2019, where any cruising was going to be done on a sailboat. And the catamarans really hadn't started coming out. It was a sailboat. And then McCrogan was one of the first, and Grand Banks was probably the first that offered an alternative for a sailor who could switch over to the dark side, to the power side, and have a proper boat.
In fact, our first boat show in Annapolis, a woman said it so perfectly. They had a Grand Banks. And she said, in the war between sailboats and power boats, trawlers are kind of Switzerland. Everybody likes them. You can look at a Grand Banks, it just looks good. And of course, back then, their subtitle or subhead was Dependable Diesel Cruisers. You could take the family out and spend Thanksgiving in the Bahamas, or go up to any of the San Juan Islands and just have a ball without roughing it. I mean, it was.
Yeah, I mean, the sailboat was, you're heeled over, you're changing sails, you're out in the weather, you're dependent on the wind. And the power boat, the trawlers, opened up an enclosed pilot house, your cup of coffee, BB's book, wearing your slippers and crossing oceans. Just amazing. Now, the name for the magazine, PassageMaker, came from BB's book, didn't it?
Oh, it came from BB's boat.
From his boat, right. Sorry, yeah. Voyaging Under Power was the book, and the name of his boat.
And for the first anniversary of the magazine, I spent time with the current owner of PassageMaker in Daytona.
So this is 98?
Seems to be 97.
Okay.
97.
Yeah.
And Don and his wife were there, and he was, the boat was in great shape. They had done a lot of cruising down South America, and we got lots of great pictures of the boat. And it was so simple. It was so comfortable. It didn't have a lot of stuff on it. And it was
a kiss boat. Yeah.
It definitely worked. They took the sails off because it never worked. He had flopper stoppers, and it just was a real, it never went around the world, which people assume it did, and it didn't.
Yeah.
That was really the Sinks and, people like Bruce Kessler that did that.
Yeah, Bruce and John.
But the early boats were definitely simple, and then they got more complicated as.
I remember being a sailboat builder, and people wanted to add an inverter. What do you want an inverter for? Well, we want to be able to plug a coffee maker in or a hair dryer. And then it went to air conditioning on boats. Well, that requires a generator, and anything you want to have in your modern home, you can now have on your trawler. And that's more stuff to look after, more stuff to manage, more spare parts. It gets complicated. And I think one of the skills that most owner-operators need to have is the ability to be a do-it-yourself. You don't necessarily need to change valves on the engine, but you need to be able to say, okay, this isn't working. What's the breaker? Who worked there last? And diagnose things. That there is some responsibility that you need to have as an owner-operator to not just expect you can pull off to the side of the road and have AAA come and fix it for you.
And in many cases, because of the flexibility you need in some of the engine rooms, it's really the wife who becomes the person who checks them.
I'm glad you said that, because there is a traditional role, and I'm worried about saying stereotypes. I don't want to say, but typically when you're coming into the dock, it's the husband driving the boat. The wife is dragging these giant fenders and the shore power cords, and she is equally capable, if not better, suited to operate the boat. And generally the man is a little bit stronger and he can do it. But that still is.
But that needs to change, because today with bow and stern thrusters and twin engines and joysticks and all the other stuff, a 10-year-old girl, in fact, a 10-year-old girl at the Cummins, when Cummins came out with the Zeus drives, they did a press thing down in Charleston. And they took us out on some drug running boat that was going like 70 knots. But anyway, they were also showing and they had a young girl. They had the boat sitting there with the sky hook or whatever Zeus calls it, with no lines on it, sitting in this slip. And she gets aboard and she's like moving the boat in and turning it around and coming back in. And it was just intuitive.
Yeah.
She wasn't doing, I'm sure she was given a little.
Well, I would say the hardest part of any boat, sailor power, is docking.
Absolutely.
So if you can make that easier, and bow and stern thrusters, I remember when we first started doing the Nordhavns with the bow thrusters, and it was kind of like, really, real men don't need a bow thruster. But you know what? It does make it pretty easy. And then stern thrusters, but having both, and if you have a twin engine boat, the maneuverability is fabulous.
Why not take advantage of it? Yeah. If it reduces the anxiety level and it makes both of you comfortable changing roles, it really makes a lot more sense for the guy.
Well, and there's a lot of things, I talk about it. We're in Baltimore for the TrawlerFest, and that's why we're able to get it together with Bill, who drove up from Annapolis. But in my Dialing in Your Trawler class, I talk about a lot of the different techniques and the Sena or ear tech headsets that you can put on to be able to talk. So if I'm on a boat with Pam and she's driving the boat and I'm up at the windlass or getting ready to anchor or coming into the dock, she can talk to me in a normal voice, and that there's no yelling to be heard over a lot of wind, and that reduces the anxiety as well. It's pleasure boating, it's cruising.
It speaks to the need for communications, and we're absolutely guilty of this coming into any marina on the way south on our power catamaran. Where the helm is on the flybridge, you just can't see the side deck, and so I would say, do you have the line? And what does that even mean? Yeah. Do you have it in your hand? Is it around a cleat? Are you handing it to somebody else? At what point in this process can I relax?
Right.
And of course, she winds up talking because she's so social. She's not listening to me. She's talking.
Oh, yeah, we just came in. We've had a great time. Yeah, where can we get our laundry done?
That was very stressful. Well, okay, we got to work on this a little bit. Yeah. And then you add the dynamic of Annie, our dog, who just wants to get off the boat and to go check out the new smells.
Yeah, and go see everybody. Well, with all of the yards you've been to, all of the boat builders that you've been to, what would be your advice for somebody who has not had a boat before, who has decided that a trawler is probably easier than learning how to sail and handling sails? How should they go about deciding what boat makes sense. I mean, part of it is what they want to do, but what would be your thoughts to somebody new who wanting to get into boating? How would you guide them through a conversation?
Have a really honest discussion with yourself about what are you really going to do with this boat?
Yeah.
So many
really
people
going to cross oceans.
Yeah, well, it's not even that much, but because if you really want to go to the Med, get a small enough boat that you can ship it, because then you don't have to have all this equipment that you don't need once you're over there.
Right.
But the other thing is, don't get too big of a boat. Everybody says, well, we want to have room for the kids and the grandkids. Guaranteed, they're not coming.
You're so right. The smallest boat that's big enough, you don't buy the boat for everybody else. You buy for yourself with enough room for another couple, or, 2 heads, I think is a kind of a good.
Yeah. If you want to do the Rideau, if you're an East Coast person and you want to do the ICW to go to the Keys and then maybe up to the Canada and do the Rideau Canal or one of those things, or if you're in the West Coast, you can cruise pretty much on really small boats and be very comfortable, as long as you're willing to accept certain compromises.
Right.
But once you just start laying out, I needed this and I need to know, you don't need this stuff. And I think that's the number one problem that people do, is they tend to overanalyze it and to not be realistic. If you're not going to Tahiti, you don't,
like the guy you were talking about earlier with the had to have a Nordhavn 46, and then when you talked to him about what he was really going to do, that wasn't the right tool for the job.
Right. And I've been to Tahiti, and trust me, most people do not want to get there from the United States. I mean, it's a long trip.
Yeah.
And it's just, if that's what you want to do, that's a very small minority of, as we've talked about, we're both members of the Ocean Cruising Club.
Right.
And in fact, I'm hoping to spend part of the time manning the booth at the sailboat show to kind of help people understand the value of some of these organizations. But most people just want to have a coastal experience. And the inland waterways, if you take all the scary stuff about ocean passages and then you do something like, the Rideau Canal I happen to love, it's fresh water. Yeah. You have college kids in uniforms doing all the work. I mean, it's so much fun.
Is that up in Canada?
It's up in Canada, from Kingston, Ontario, and up to Ottawa. But there are other canals. I mean, we have a lot of canals in the United States and in North America, and just that's, I think, the appeal of portions of the Great Loop.
Yeah. Now, you slipped something in there that I caught a little while ago that I'd forgotten about, but you had a power catamaran. Mm-hmm. Was that after the Zimmerman 36?
Oh, yes.
So that's interesting for somebody who had sailboats. Then you get the trawler with the lobster boat, and then the Zimmerman, and then you transition to the power cat? How did that?
I have always been fascinated by the catamaran concept. And personally, I think a power catamaran makes more sense than a sailing cat.
Well, dealing with, not having to deal with sails and strings and just heeling.
There weren't that many out there, but I spent time in New Zealand with Malcolm Tennant before he died. Tragic accident. He was in his garden and fell over and hit his head on one of the rocks. It was fascinating to spend time with him in Auckland. And so I had an opportunity to get this PDQ 41, which has 2 engines, no thrusters, and anything. And within 10 minutes, I could show you how to walk that boat sideways without anybody knowing that you didn't have a thruster. Yeah. The sense of stability and control you had with 2 big BMW Yanmar engines was just fabulous. And one fall, I took it down to Stewart alone. And that's not something.
Did you go outside or inside?
I was inside. Okay. It was inside, but I was by myself. Yeah. And that just speaks to how easy it is to run a boat.
Well, if you can leave the dock pretty easily, you can anchor reasonably, but again, coming back to the dock, and if you can maneuver the boat and you know how to do it,
you can quickly look like you are a professional. Yeah. And just, which again, that speaks to all the technology today with the twin outboards, with the joysticks, with the control capabilities are so much larger than they used to be.
Well, something like the yacht controller, which came out and gave you the ability on a lanyard to have a control box that would do your engines and your thrusters, and you could be anywhere. We used to talk when we were building new boats about putting docking stations in the Portuguese bridge and one in the cockpit for backing up, and dedicated hardware and wires and everything there. And now you've got this box you can carry around with you. One of my clients was up in Alaska on his Nordhavn 55, He and his wife had gone out to dinner. He had the yacht controller with him, and the tide had changed the ability to be able to hop on the boat very easily. So he just pulled the thrusters, brought the boat into the dock, and she hopped on. I mean, the technology, the things that are available.
And that's all good. Yeah. Anything that makes it simpler, safer, easier is going to make it more fun and is going to get you to use your boat.
Yeah, yeah. Going back to sailing into power, a mutual friend of ours, Steve and Linda Dashew, were dyed-in-the-wool sailors, did all the beautiful long-range sailboats out of aluminum, and you were always bugging them because it was natural for a sailboat builder to get into.
I called him once or twice a year for almost 10 years. When are you going to come to the dark side? When are you going to? And he said, "Oh, I'm still my back, whatever." But then his back started to really bother him, and then he decided he was going to do this. And I remember when I went to go on sea trial in New Zealand.
The first 64 was done? This was the big one, Windhorse, yeah.
83. Yeah. And Linda and I went to the supermarket, which I love to do when I'm in a different country, because it's just so much fun, the different things. And she had to make sure they had peanut butter. But anyway, she was saying, I wish we had done this years ago. It was so much less work, and it allowed them to go places that they couldn't go, or let's just say it would be too difficult to go in the sailboat. And they had, because the way they designed the boat, everybody, the two of them were living in the center of the boat, and you had like a 17-foot long engine room in the back and a 16-foot, basically a buoyancy chamber in the front.
Right.
I mean, it was beautiful boat.
Yeah.
Spectacularly designed. He's a really smart guy. But it was just fun.
Smart, yeah.
And he's been to our house. In fact, he brought the next boat he brought to our house and was there for a couple of weeks. And we just kept thinking, well, I hope it doesn't blow because he's going to rip all my pilings out because the boat was so big.
Yeah.
But just, they did a really spectacular job. It's really
interesting that their construction is aluminum, and yet most popular builders are using fiberglass. But we mentioned the Cape Horn, which is a steel boat. It seems to be, in North America anyway, that fiberglass molds, that's an easier resale. It's easier for them to build, but there are other materials, and I would say the only one to probably stay away from would be wood, just because that's going to be
unless you're in the Sam Devlin camp where he does the stitching glue with the epoxy wood.
Cold molded. I don't really count that as wood. Now,
wood. Okay.
Was BB's PassageMaker, was that a wood boat? Yeah. So I mean, what do I know? I mean, there's a boat that's,
and yet it was neglected for many years after Don sold it. I don't know who owned it after that, but it wound up sitting on the hard for a long time. Yeah. And that's not good for a wood boat.
It's not good for any boat to sit. So I think it's a good idea to keep your boat, to use it. Bill, we've talked about the history of trawlers with PassageMaker, really bringing it to the attention of people, how we've kind of come to today. What do you see in the future of trawlers?
I think we're going to see some changes that I think will be just a result of how life has changed.
Sure.
With the introduction of hybrid cars, the introduction of electric cars, I'm just thinking that in the future, a family that has an electric, Tesla, Jaguar, Audi, coming down to their powerboat or their trawler, their cruising motorboat with big engines and going out and burning hundreds of gallons of fuel over a weekend there's just something that's going to feel wrong about that. And I think that while I don't see us necessarily moving back to the days of sailing, I'm curious what kind of solutions are out there for us to kind of embrace, because again, much of the technology comes from the automotive world. And now what are we going to see that's going to come into the Torpedo? You have
solar and wind,
the Green Line. I was researching this on a bigger scale, and the U.S. Navy built one of their small amphibious aircraft carriers, the Makin Island, and it has a hybrid drive, and it has 2 speeds. And under 12 knots, it has a generator, diesel electric generator, that's very, very efficient, and then it has gas turbines to go much faster. And they came up with a process that somebody coined in the Navy called sprint and drift, where they plot out, again on the plotter, where they normally would expect to be in a normal situation. They'll speed up the ship with the gas turbines, and when they get close, they slow down to the diesel electric, so they get there at the same time. And they saved in 1 year 800,000 gallons of fuel for almost $2 million. I'm not saying we're going to follow that, but I think we need to have some people thinking about it. Yes, with carbon fiber hulls, with lightweight construction like the MJM, you can get speed with less horsepower. But I think we have to address, at some point, the elephant in the room is going to be these diesel engines and the emissions that nobody wants to support anymore.
Yeah.
And so the future is, we've seen outboards coming now on everything, on even trawler kind of cruising boats. And while they don't get the economy of a diesel engine, they're cleaner. They have other benefits so that they're a viable option. But I think in the future, that's going to be something that we're going to see that will probably evolve, although I can't tell you what it will be.
Yeah, well, I don't know if we'll get to self-driving boats, because that would take a lot of fun out of it if you're watching your boat without being on board. But I can definitely see that getting away from diesel and fuel-based stuff is going to be. And
the attempts at solar aren't totally without merit, but it just hasn't happened yet. There was the fuel cell. There was a guy who was trying to develop a fuel cell powered kind of a Fleming looking boat, but that just didn't get off the ground. And maybe power catamarans to take less power to reach a certain speed. Maybe the speed thing won't be as big a deal if we can offer alternatives to enjoying the trip more.
Well, and one of the missing links that we really haven't talked about is the motor sailor. I mean, you go from sail to trawler, but the in-between step is a motor sailor. Maybe there will be a little more emphasis on that, where you can actually be taking advantage of the wind, getting through the water without running a diesel engine when you have the right conditions.
Well, I do know that a couple from California, from Huntington Beach, built a power catamaran, one of Malcolm Tennant's boats, and they wanted to join one of Jimmy Cornell's round the world rallies, but they were on a power boat. And he said, well, can you do something that makes you not so much of a power boat? And they were investigating flying a huge kite downwind, because again, you're in the trade winds most of the time. So again, I think there are going to be solutions out there. The traditional motor sailor is probably not quite the solution.
Yeah.
It's kind of too complicated, too hard, whatever. But I do see that will be in the future.
Well, and even things on the faster boats, foiling. I mean, foiling is now everywhere. I mean, you can foil on surfboards and on skis, and I mean, it's just that it's.
Have you tried it?
No, I haven't. I'm a slow guy. How about you?
Well, I don't know. I was looking at this latest. I was looking at these young athletes on these smaller than surfboards, and they're racing around on a real race course with kites. And they're all on foils going super fast.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the Olympic classes now is a co-ed catamaran foiling. And we've got a good family friend, Riley Gibbs. Go, Riley. Trying to go for gold in the upcoming Olympics.
So it's an interesting future, but I think we will have to definitely see some changes.
Phil, thank you very much. Really good seeing you.
Have a good TrawlerFest.
Thanks, everybody. We hope you'll enjoy this. And we've got more videos coming, so thanks for your time. Hi, trawler fans. Thank you for watching the JMYS YouTube video channel. I'm fortunate to be offshore again. If you'd like to subscribe to this channel, you can click the button below. We also like to publish other listings and other trawler skills videos. You can click on one of those on the side to watch those. Thank you very much for your thumbs up. We love having you watch our videos. We love putting them together for you, and hope you come back again soon.